Good day. Today we are going to talk about past tenses. The first one, past simple. The past simple describes actions which are complete. We use the past simple for a past action or a sequence of past actions. For instance, I woke up very early. Then I got dressed, had breakfast, and left the house. Secondly, a state, event or action that lasted for a period of time in the past. For example, the Smiths owned a farm in the north of the country. Or it rained for several days and nights. Thirdly, a habit in the past. When we were children, we often went to the cinema. For regular verbs, we add ed to the base form of the verb. Work, worked. Or d if the verb already ends in e. Move, moved. In regular one-syllable verbs with a singular vowel followed by a consonant, we double the final consonant when ending. For example, in the verb to stop. Stopped, we double the last letter. The bus stopped suddenly. Many verbs are irregular. Each one has to be learned. The verb form is the same for all persons. For example, I, you, she, he, it, we, and they. And we make questions and negatives with irregular verbs in the same ways as for regular verbs. Irregular verb examples in the past simple. He was afraid. Negative sentence. He wasn't afraid. Was he afraid? Why was he afraid? And who was afraid? Now, example with an irregular verb. The meal began with soup. The meal didn't begin with soup. Did the meal begin with soup? Why did the meal begin with soup? Who began the meal with soup? Next past tense is past continuous. The past continuous describes states, events, or actions which are temporary or incomplete. We use the past continuous, firstly, to emphasize that a past event continued for some time. For instance, it was raining all night. Secondly, we use past continuous to describe an action in progress at a particular time in the past, or a temporary past situation or event. We were watching TV at 9 o'clock last night. Then, to describe two or more past actions happening at the same time. For instance, he was cooking the dinner while she was talking to him. Next, to set the scene in a story. We set off early. Before long, the sun was rising above the distant hills and the birds were singing their morning chorus. And finally, to talk about something we were planning or expected to happen. We were planning to move to Canada, but decided to stay here instead. We also use the past simple and the past continuous with when and as while to talk about a past action or event that was interrupted. Notice when we use a comma. They arrived while we were having dinner. While we were having dinner, they arrived. We were having dinner when they arrived. Or when they arrived, we were having dinner. Next tense is past perfect. Past perfect simple. We use the past perfect simple to describe an event or action that happened before another past event or action. The past perfect simple makes it clear that one action or event was completed before the second one started. You may compare. When I arrived, the train had left. The train left before I arrived. When I got there, the train left. The train left as I was arriving or immediately after I arrived. Secondly, we use past perfect simple to describe an event or action that happened before a particular time in the past. It was June 1991. Anne and Michael had just got married. It was midnight and the children had gone to bed hours ago. By 9, most of the workers had arrived. We use the past perfect simple with many of the adverbs and expressions we use with the present perfect. For example, just, already, yet, for, since, ever, never, it was the first or it was the second time, it was the most. For instance, Blake and Julie had just left and there was nobody at home. Sophie and Austin met again at the reunion. They hadn't seen each other for several years. Or it was the first time in his life he had felt truly happy. We often use the past perfect simple in clauses with when, before, after, until, as soon as, and by. When the sequence of events is clear, we can also use the past simple. For instance, when we finished the meal, I made some coffee. Or as soon as I had told her the news, I regretted it. Next one, the past perfect continuous. We use the past perfect continuous, firstly, to emphasize how long an event or action lasted. For instance, it had been raining for 3 days when the dam burst. Secondly, to describe an action whose effects, results, or consequences were clear in the past. For instance, I had been moving house and I was tired and dirty. So, once again, we use the past perfect continuous to talk about actions and events which started before a particular time in the past and were still in the progress up to that time in the past. And we can also use the past perfect continuous to talk about events which started before a time in the past and which finished, but where the effects or results were still important at a certain point in the past. For example, it had been raining and the ground was still wet. Now we are going to talk about future forms. Future forms and meanings. Shall or will. We use the first tense is future simple. We use will for statements of fact or general predictions about the future. We will have a break at 6. The president will outline his policy tomorrow. Or they will be here soon. Secondly, we use future simple for decisions we make at the time of speaking. For instance, would you like to come with us to the theater tonight? All right, I'll join you. Thirdly, we use the future simple in offers, promises, and requests. For instance, I will do that for you. Will you help me, please? Next, we use the future simple with verbs like believe, doubt, expect, hope, suppose, and think, and adverbs like perhaps, probably, and definitely. I expect they will be here soon. Do you think they will win? They probably won't come by taxi. We use shall with I or we in offers and suggestions. Shall I come with you? Shall we go out? Or we use shall in place of will in more formal English, especially written English. For instance, we shall make every effort to deal with your complaint. Now construction, to be going to. We use construction to be going to for things we expect to happen based on present evidence. For instance, look at that plane, it's going to land. And we use to be going to for intentions when we have already decided to do something. They are going to visit Madame Tussaud when they are in London. Next, future continuous. We use the future continuous for an activity that will be in progress at a point in time or for a period of time in the future. For instance, this time tomorrow we will be sitting on a plane, or I will be studying in the library all evening. We use future continuous for intentions or events that are fixed or expected to happen. They will be going to town tomorrow to do some shopping, or he will be arriving at 6. And thirdly, we use future continuous to talk about a future activity without expressing deliberate intention. For instance, she will probably be running her own company in a few years' time. Now you may compare the future continuous and future simple using will. I will go and see him tomorrow. It's a deliberate intention or promise. I will be seeing him tomorrow so I can give him your message. An action that will happen anyway, one not specially planned. Now, next tense is future perfect simple. We use the future perfect simple for an action that will be completed before a particular time in the future, often with by or by the time plus present simple. For instance, I will have finished this job by Friday, or we will have cooked dinner by the time you get there. Now, future perfect continuous. We use the future perfect continuous with for to emphasize the duration of a state or action which will probably continue after the time mentioned. For instance, we will have been living here for 2 years in January. So, once again, we use the future perfect continuous form when we are looking back to the past from a point in the future, and we want to emphasize the length of duration of an activity or event. Now, next topic of our discussion, modal verbs. Modal meaning. We often use modal verbs or other modal expressions when we want to express an opinion or attitude about a possible fact or to control a possible action. All modal expressions are about the speaker's or writer's view of the world. We can divide most modal verbs and expressions into 2 types of meaning. The speaker or writer decides how certain something is either in the present, future, or past. They predict or speculate about a fact. We see this type of meaning when we talk about degrees of certainty, possibility, likelihood, or doubt. Example: Paul can't be home yet. It's impossible. He left 10 minutes after us. The speaker hears the phone ring and predicts who is ringing. Now, there is the phone. That will be Mom. Or, I may go. I haven't decided yet. The speaker or writer wants to control or direct the action. They give and refuse permission. They talk about obligation and necessity. They talk about how they would like the world to be. For example, parent says to the child, you can come if you are good, or he should take more care. Tell 10 she needn't bother about the washing up, or you mustn't worry so much about her, or you may go now. It's formal. Next. Now, the first modal verb is can. Can comes first in the verb phrase after the subject and before another verb. For instance, we can take the train to Birmingham. Can is never used with another modal verb. He can hear the music from his room sometimes. The negative form of can is can't or cannot. We don't use don't or doesn't or didn't with can. For example, I can't believe you said that. We can use the full form cannot in formal contexts or when we want to emphasize something. For instance, I can't understand why she behaves like that. Could comes first in the verb phrase after the subject and before another verb. We could have lunch early. Could cannot be used with another modal verb. We could drive to France. The negative form of could is couldn't. We don't use don't or doesn't or didn't with could. He couldn't lift that, it's too heavy. The subject and could change position to form questions. We don't use do or does or did. For example, could I pay by credit card? Now may. May comes first in the verb phrase, after the subject and before another verb. It may be possible for him to get home tonight. May can't be used with another modal verb. This may hurt you. The negative form of may is may not. We don't use don't or doesn't or didn't with may. We may not have enough information at the moment. Now, next modal verb is must. Must comes first in the verb phrase, after the subject and before another verb. She must have lots of friends. Must can't be used with another modal verbs. This must be your sister. The negative form of must is mustn't. There mustn't be any rubbish left. We can use the full form must not in formal context or when we want to emphasize something. We must not leave any rubbish. The subject and must change position to form questions. We don't use do or does or did. Must you make that noise? Now need. Need is a semi-modal verb because in some ways it is like a modal verb, in the other ways like a main verb. We use need mostly in the negative form to indicate that there is no obligation or necessity to do something. You needn't take off your shoes. Affirmatives with the semi-modal need are not common and they are used in formal contexts. There is almost always a negative word. No one, nobody, or nothing, or phrase in the clause, even if the verb phrase is affirmative. No one need think that we are doing this every week. It means we are not doing this every week. Or nobody need know the name of the person who made the complaint. Not a thing need change on this page. Need comes first in the verb phrase. Let's forget about it. No one need know about it. We can't use another modal verb with need. No one need read this. And finally, ought to and should, two more modal verbs. Ought to is a simple modal verb because it is in some ways like a modal verb, in some ways like a main verb. For example, unlike modal verbs, it is followed by to, but like modal verbs, it does not change form for person. For instance, I ought to phone my parents. I ought to be easy now. Ought to comes first in the verb phrase, after the subject and before another verb. We ought to do more exercises. Ought to cannot be used with another modal verb. Medicine ought to be free. The negative is formed by adding not after ought not to. It can be contracted to oughtn't to. We don't use don't or doesn't or didn't with ought to. We ought not to have ordered so much food. Now, should. Should comes first in the verb phrase, after the subject and before another verb. I should go home now. Should cannot be used with another modal verb. For instance, it should probably be sunny at this time of the year. The negative form of should is shouldn't. We don't use don't or doesn't or didn't with should. There shouldn't be many people at the beach today. We use the full